Hi, my name is Roy Canterbury. I'm going to be your host here today on Archery Talk 101, Beginner's Guide to Archery. Today, what you're going to learn is different types of bows, with some of the advantages and disadvantages of each one of them. Now, I'm going to start off with a little definition of what I think archery is. Archery is a stick with a string on it that propels another stick, or some mechanical means of projecting an arrow or a bolt. So, with that, we're going to start off with a little bit with the oldest one known anyway, which is going to be the longbow. That's been around for probably 10,000 years. They've found them as much as 7,000 BC. They found arrowheads dating clear back about 70,000 years ago. So it's been around for a while. One of the advantages of longbow is it is very simple, easy to do. If you're out in the woods, you can probably find a stick and make a string and fashion another stick for an arrow. So it's very simple to do, simple to shoot. There's not much to them. They do take quite a bit of practice to get good at them because normally you don't have any sights on a long bow. Some have arrow rests that you can put your arrow in. Other times you have to just shoot off your hand, which you kind of need to have a glove on because the fletching can tear up your hand a little bit as it's flying off of there. So that's some of the disadvantages. Is it does take a lot of practice to get good at it because you don't have sights. You have to learn instinctive shooting, and that can take some time, but it's a lot of fun shooting them that way. Then the next bow we'll talk about is going to be what we call a recurve bow. Now, unlike the longbow, which is just a straight stick, the recurves, the ends of them curve back. So when you string them up, the longbow looks like a D, where the recurve, which is a little bit faster, they do feel a little bit different when you shoot them, but the ends curve up instead of pointing back towards the shooter. The advantage of that is you're going to get a little more speed. They have most all of them will have a rest place or a place to set your arrows. So you're not shooting off your hand. A lot of them will have places to put sights on them, so you can shoot them with sights as opposed to just shooting instinctively. You do have sights you can aim. So that's kind of some of the advantages. Is it's also simple, very simple. There's not much maintenance involved to be the long bows or recurves. You just have to make sure that you keep them clean and a little bit of oiling on them or clean them so that they don't get damaged and absorb moisture. You just want to check them once in a while for cracks to make sure you're not developing a crack or chip. And they just want to finish it up so that you don't have moisture getting in them because they are wood. Normally they're all wood. Some of the newer recurves will have aluminum riser, and a lot of the limbs can either be fiberglass or wood. So the disadvantage of that is it does take time to get good at it. Not as much as it does for a longbow because you do have sights. So it does take some practice to get good at it so that you can shoot. You're not going to normally shoot a long range. Most of the shooting for longbows and recurves for most people are done at 20 yards or 18 meters for those listening with the metric system. Now, we do have outdoor events for shooting. We'll get into that at a later one on different types of shooting. A later podcast will cover that. So now we step up into compound bows. Now, those all have bows that are either have wheels or cams that allow you to draw back and have some percentage of let off, which means you draw back to a certain point, and then the weight starts decreasing. So you actually get to hold less weight. If you had a 50% let off, which is a lot of your original compounds were, and it was a 70-pound bow, you're holding 35. So you can see how it's an advantage to sit back and hold them. Where your long bows and recurves, you pull them back, you're holding the full weight. So that's one of the differences in your compound bows. Most all your compound bows, I don't know of any of them that don't have designed to shoot with a rest. A lot of the newer ones are all center shot, which means your arrow is in a straight line with your string travel. And you have places to put sights on them. So most other compounds generally are going to have sights and a rest. You can either shoot them with fingers or release aid. Uh, Now fingers, you don't want to shoot your short axle. How that's measured is you take the axle at the upper limb and measure to the axle lower limb. That's where your wheels and cams are fastened to, and that's your axle to axle length. The longer ones allow you to shoot fingers. The short ones nowadays, some of them are so short, you wouldn't be able to shoot with fingers because they would be pinching your fingers so much that you wouldn't be able to shoot them. So some of the advantages of the compound bow is they're faster than your recurve, your longbows. So they're going to shoot a little flatter. You're going to have your sights and you're going to adjust your sights, 20, 30, 40 yard pin, whatever you're setting up for the range that you're shooting. It does take a fair amount of practice to get good at, not as much as the recurve or the longbow, but it still takes quite a bit of practice to get good enough that you would be able to hit what you're shooting at. And, some of the disadvantages is it's more complicated. You're not going to be able to change your strings like you can on recurves and longbows. You're going to have a bow press because they're already under pressure before you draw back when they're already strung up. Unlike the recurve and combos where they're not under pressure until you string them, you manually string them. With compounds, they're always going to be under some pressure. So you have to make sure you take care of everything. Look at your strings, make sure they're not getting bad. So that's one of the things you just have to look out for. So when you get into shooting them, a lot of times you go to release aid, and we'll cover shooting styles in a later video or podcast. But that's kind of your options there. And then the next thing we're going to go into is crossbows. And unlike the three previous ones, crossbows shoot bolts is what they're called instead of arrows. They're normally shorter in the 22 to 24 inch range, where your compound arrows run in your 30-inch range. Now those crossbows have a stock just like you would on a regular firearm. You should put on your shoulder, have a trigger that you fire. The original ones had front pins that you would set and then a rear sight. Most of the newer ones now have a scope on them that are set up so that you have your 20-yard crosshair, you set that, and the rest of them are set because that scope is designed for the speed of that crossbow. Now, for the limbs that you have on them, you either have recurve limbs. Excalibur is a brand that uses the recurve limbs, just like a regular recurve bow, other than it's mounted on a crossbow and shot, horizontally instead of vertically. A lot of the other ones, most all the other manufacturers use the compound style with the either wheels or cams on them. You're going to draw those. Unlike with the recurve, the longbow, and the compound bow, you're going to draw them with an aid of some kind. You're not going to draw them with one hand and your fingers. There's just so much more weight. They run in the range of 125 to 200 pounds draw weight, where your recurves, longbows, and compound bows, you run in 30 to 70 pounds. So they're a lot heavier, and that needs to be a little heavier. If you're going to hunt with them, they have to be so much more power because those bolts are so short. It takes a short amount of time to develop the power into them. And you're going to either use a rope cocking aid or a mechanical crank. The advantage of the rope is it's quicker and quieter. The advantage of the crank is it's easy to crank. Anybody can crank that lever. And with any kind of strength, even 7-10-year-olds could cock it, with no trouble, where they're not going to be able to with the rope aid. The disadvantage of the rope is it takes a lot more strength to cock it. You have a technique you're going to have to go through in order to do it correctly and safely. The advantage of the crank is you just hook it on a string, crank it back till it loads, take the crank off and store it in the holder that they normally have on them, or you take them off and put them separately. So that's kind of the disadvantage of them. The crossbow is the quickest to learn how to shoot and get good with it because it's shot just like a rifle. you're going to have to just set your 20-yard pin, and then you're set your 30, 40, 50, or however many pins or crosshairs are on the scope. So that's kind of it for that. There is a new type of crossbow come out. I haven't shot them yet, and it's used with compressed air that uses to project the arrow, or probably a bolt, like probably in this one, depending on how long they are. But that one is one that is interesting. The advantages I see in it is it's going to be quiet because it's just compressed air. It's not going to have a loud noise of the crossbow going off or the compound bow shooting. The disadvantage, if you have compressed air that you have to carry and deal with. Every time you shoot, you're going to use up some of your reserve air. So your speed is going to decrease on each shot, which means you're going to have varying degrees of power going into the arrow, and it's going to vary. If you're out for a long period of time, you have to worry about how many times you're shooting, because recharging a high compressed air cylinder, it can be a little problematic when you're out in the field. Someday I'd like to try one just to see what they're like, but it looks like it wouldn't be good for hunting. I'm not sure how many places that actually allow you to hunt with them for big game. Might be able to use them for small game. So basically, in a nutshell, you have your bows that are going to be your recurve longbows pulled with your hand. You're going to have your crossbows. They each have their own advantages and disadvantages. So you just need to look at, what type you're looking for, what kind of bow is it you want to have. That kind of help determine what you do, when you go select the bow. Do you want to do a lot of shooting and practicing, which is a lot of fun to go out and shoot? So you get more shots in, like with the recurve, the compound, and the longbow. You're going to do a little more shooting. Your compound is going to have a nice little let off, so you'll be able to shoot a little more weight, or a little bit less weight, and be able to shoot more. It's a little not quite as taxing on your muscles. Where the longbow and recurve, you pull it back, it's going to hold that full weight, so you're not going to be able to hold for a long period of time, just because you're holding that full weight. Crossbows, the advantage of those, they're going to be cocked. Now, if you're hunting out of a tree stand, you're going to cock it once you get in the tree, and you're going to have to fire a bolt or into the ground before you get down, because you don't want to climb up or get down while they're cocked. That can be real dangerous. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. For those that are just starting out, I have beginners checklist for new archers. Just click the link in the description below and download it. It's free. There's no charge to it. And just put in your email address, I believe the name and email address, and I'll send you a link to a PDF that has all the stuff we need to look at when you go into the bow, and how to, what you're doing on evaluating your bows. I also have a Facebook group, Archery Talk 101, where we can go a little bit more depth, where you can ask questions and get answers on any questions that you have. So look at joining that one as well. So this is Roy Canterbury signing off on Archery Talk 101. See you next week.